Daima Super Saiyan 4 versus GT Super Saiyan 4. These two versions of the iconic form that have their own unique flair. But today we're going to break it down and figure out which one takes the crown. Is Daima Super Saiyan 4 the superior power-up, or does GT's version still hold the throne? If you enjoy conversations like this and want to take part in deeper Dragon Ball discussions, I highly encourage you to join the Dragon Ball HQ Discord server, link below in the description. We'll be diving into this topic and more over there. Now, without further delay, let's begin. There's a moment in Dragon Ball Daima that stands out more than people might realize. During the clash between base Vegeta and Goma, we get a reaction from the Supreme Kai that paints an interesting picture. His astonishment at the raw power being displayed without any transformation suggests that he must have misunderstood just how far Goku and Vegeta had come since the Buu era. The implication? Their base forms alone may now rival or exceed what he believed only fusion or Super Saiyan tiers could access. It opens the door to a subtle narrative interpretation, one that reframes Goku's attainment of Super Saiyan 4. Perhaps rather than it being a natural step in his Saiyan evolution, the transformation was a deliberate effort, a preparation of sorts, born from training with an enemy like Kid Buu in mind, and that changes the framing of the form entirely. Instead of an isolated upgrade, it becomes an anticipatory countermeasure for threats he feared might return. But there's another layer to this. The Super Saiyan 4 multiplier for Daima has always been a topic of debate. When we seen the Kid Super Saiyan 4 version, it was hard to believe that it was significant. There's no way it could have an astronomical jump like we see in God tier transformations. Watching characters like Super Saiyan 3 Goku and others tag team Goma only to be overwhelmed moments later, even after going Super Saiyan 4, didn't give the impression of an exponentially higher form. It felt more grounded, maybe 4 to 5 times the strength of Super Saiyan 3 at best, something that falls in tradition of Toriyama's earlier scaling. Powerful, but not absurd. When they become adults, however, the context shifts a bit. That same base Vegeta as an adult and non-transformed is holding his own with Goma, and Piccolo responds to the power being thrown around like it's completely outside of his frame of reference. His line about what power may not sound like much, but coming from someone who's fought by side with Ultimate Gohan and witnessed fusion firsthand, that kind of shock is telling. It makes you wonder if Goku and Vegeta's base forms have climbed into realms previously reserved for their highest transformations, maybe even beyond Buu Saga benchmarks like Super Buu or Ultimate Gohan. And then there's Goma himself, rapidly adapting to Super Saiyan 4 almost immediately after Goku reveals it. When Goku powers up and charges in, it doesn't take long for Goma to adjust and nearly incapacitate him. Compare this to his slower adaptation against Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta and it paints an interesting picture. The initial usage of Super Saiyan 4 here may not have been significantly stronger than Super Saiyan 3. It might have taken time for the form to ramp up or settle into its own full power, especially considering the unique properties of the adult body versus the child one. But things escalate. Goma doesn't just adapt, he transforms. The creature grows into a towering kaiju-sized behemoth, dwarfing anything we'd seen prior, and we can't quantify the increase in power from its transformations directly. The massive physical growth, however, implies a substantial jump. Bigger has always equaled stronger in Dragon Ball logic, and here it seems to follow that rule to the extreme. So even if one were to argue that characters like Kid Buu might scale up through certain interpretations, it becomes difficult to stack them against something as wildly escalating as a kaiju Goma, especially in its final stages, which brings us to the third and most decisive point. Daima doesn't follow the anime continuity. It falls under the manga's timeline, and the distinction carries weight. Power levels, scaling, assumptions, and even character behavior can shift depending on the source material, and this changes the entire framing. In the manga timeline, many of the feats are toned down compared to the anime's more exaggerated high points. This naturally places a lower ceiling on Daima cast by default, unless stated otherwise. So while Goku and Vegeta may be monsters by base alone, their feats in Daima should still be interpreted with manga scale logic in mind. One last thing to note is when Goku is in adult form during the final fight, something subtle changes. His size. There's a noticeable difference in bulk compared to his child form even when transformed. It might not be dramatic, but it hints that Super Saiyan 4 might scale differently when used in an adult body. In a universe where height and mass correlate with strength, the adult version may very well produce a higher yield than the child version, even if both are technically using the same form. When you take these two together, it paints a complex and dynamic image of power in Daima. It's not just about raw numbers or traditional scaling, it's about adaptive threats, shifting continuities, and transformations that evolve with context. And once you factor that in, trying to stack characters like Kid Buu into the same tier becomes a lot more difficult than it may first appear. Now, speaking about the adult Super Saiyan form specifically, it might be tempting to assume that this version carries a larger multiplier than the child form. However, the evidence doesn't necessarily support that fact. Based on how Goma rapidly adapted to Super Saiyan 4 faster than he did to Super Saiyan 3, it's more than likely the increase in strength wasn't massive. But what the adult version does seem to inhibit is a unique unique trait, something akin to an adaptive durability, much like what we saw in Goku in GT, where the Super Saiyan 4 in GT allowed him to tank hits, take beatings, and then return stronger. Daima mirrors that feeling a bit. It gives the impression that the adult Super Saiyan 4 isn't so much about raw explosive power as it is about progressive resilience, and although Goku claims he's going all out in the fight against Goma, the way he continues to endure and counter after initial blows implies some kind of latent evolution built into the form itself, possibly tied to the full matured Saiyan physiology. When comparing the Daima continuity to the broader Dragon Ball multiverse, however, factor these things into Daima's version of Super Saiyan 4, it becomes clear that the scale is significantly reduced. Even if one tries to hype Super Saiyan 4 Daima Goku as having performed some sort of realm-shaking feat when he punched a hole in all of the demon worlds, something that might seem comparable to divine tier transformations, it doesn't really hold up. Consider this. Even the basic calculation that treats Super Saiyan 3 as a 400 times multiplier then applies to Super Saiyan 4 as something greater would still be overshadowed by something like Vegeta, and it becomes borderline impossible to rationalize that Super Saiyan 4 Goku from Daima is as strong as GT Super Saiyan 4 or anything of that nature. Goku trains for over a decade between the end of Z and GT, refining his power constantly. The Super Saiyan 4 we see in Daima, assuming it's on the same level, is nowhere near matured in the final GT version, and at a very conservative lowball, GT in Daima is comparable to Vegito from the Buu Saga in terms of a multiplier. You're talking about a form that's a fusion level of an increase. Dragon Ball Daima Super Saiyan 4 just doesn't give that implication, and this would outright make GT Super Saiyan 4 just much higher of an increase. Not only that, but the form itself is just overall better. So with all the lore and in-universe implications out of the way, now let's move on to the multiplier. Understand that there isn't a clear multiplier for either form, however, using scaling within the series we can get one, or at the very least a rough estimate. Starting with Daima Super Saiyan 4, we get somewhat of an indication using Neva magic amplification. This same magic is used on Tamagami 2, who initially struggles against Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta, but after the Neva amp, Vegeta is forced to transform into Super Saiyan 3 to win. Given that the multiplier between Super Saiyan 2 and 3 is approximately 4 times, it's reasonable to infer that the Neva enhancement offers a 4 to 5 times boost. And since Neva used this same power to awaken Super Saiyan 4 and Goku, it's possible that this is the level of the multiplier. Though you could say that Daima Super Saiyan 4 has its own multiplier, and this would be on top of that, though it would roughly be around a 10 times increase even with that. Moving to the GT variant, when Goku first clashes with baby Vegeta before the latter transforms, they're relatively even, with Goku eventually succumbing to stamina issues rather than a huge difference in strength. Baby then shifts into what's known as Super Baby 1, where he boasts of finally unlocking the pinnacle of Saiyan strength. Goku in turn remarks that he's never sent such an intense ki before, which implies that this form may tap into knowledge or power reminiscent of Super Vegito, based on Baby's fusion with Vegeta's body and his memory. Later, Baby evolves into Super Baby 2, a form that the GT Perfect files described as being visually similar to Super Saiyan 3. While this isn't a strict Super Saiyan 4 multiplier confirmation, we'll be generous and assume it operates under the similar logic. If that's the case, and Baby's form builds sequentially, then Super Baby 2 could reasonably be over 3,000 times more powerful than Goku's base form, assuming standard multipliers from Dragon Ball Z are applied. And this brings us to Golden Grade Ape Goku, who appears to overwhelm Super Baby 2 with boost strength. On paper, this shouldn't make sense. A typical Grade 8 transformation applies power 10 times, and a Super Saiyan Grade 8 boosted by 500 times. But even that multiplier wouldn't bridge the enormous gap required to surpass Baby's final form. However, GT introduces a narrative caveat here. This particular Golden Ozaru taps into Goku's latent potential, making it an exceptional case that goes beyond a raw power multiplier. The form doesn't just transform its body, it awakens its previously sealed power and effectively rewriting Goku's scaling altogether. While we aren't given an exact number, it's clear that Goku's power in his Grade 8 form exceeds most expectations. The transformation must be offering a far larger boost than the typical multiplier, as it allowed Goku to push past Baby's most powerful state at that point. It's not just a cosmic change, it represents a drastic jump in strength, certainly more than the 6-fold difference needed to overcome Super Baby 2. Following this transformation, Goku receives the iconic Super Saiyan 4 form. From the outset, he begins overwhelming Baby with apparent ease, using only a small portion of his power according to Elder Kai. However, the tide shifts when Baby himself accesses his own Grade 8 form. In contrast to Goku's version, there's no indication that Baby's transformation is unique or tied to any sort of latent potential. It's likely just a straightforward times 10 increase over his previous power. There are some who suggest that Baby's exposure to an enormous concentration of Lux waves, supposedly 1,000 times the form, amplified his strength by a similar margin. But there's no concrete evidence that Lux wave quantity scales linearly with strength multipliers. That idea remains speculative. But ultimately, Goku requires the energy of his allies to reach his full power and defeat Baby, especially with help from Majin Buu. This implies that Super Saiyan 4 by itself isn't massively stronger than Golden Grade 8 Baby. Otherwise, the narrative wouldn't stress how dangerous Baby remained maintained even after Goku's transformation. With that in mind, it's reasonable to place Super Saiyan 4's multiplier at roughly 30,000 to 40,000 times base GT Goku, and this would fit with the relative strength comparisons made throughout the Baby Saga and allows room for the transformation to remain significant without breaking consistency. And at this juncture, it would just highly scale above Daima's interpretation of its multiplier. So with all that said, it's very clear that GT's form just holds the throne.